The morning sun filtered through the airport windows as 14-year-old Tyler clutched his boarding pass with sweaty palms. This was it. His first solo flight. He'd been talking about this moment for weeks, practically bouncing off the walls with excitement every time someone mentioned it. His mom had dropped him off at the curb 20 minutes earlier, giving him the usual lecture. Be polite, keep your phone charged. Call as soon as you land. Don't talk to strangers. Actually, wait. Do talk to the flight attendants if you need help. You know what I mean? Tyler had rolled his eyes but hugged her tight anyway. Now standing in line to board, he felt that familiar flutter of nerves mixed with pure joy. He was going to visit his grandmother in Atlanta for spring break. A whole week of her famous peach cobbler, stories about the old days, and absolutely zero homework. The gate agent scanned his pass, and Tyler walked down the jet bridge, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. Inside the plane, he found his row and slid into seat 12A, the window seat. He'd specifically asked his dad to book him a window seat because he wanted to see the clouds up close. Maybe spot his school from above, watch the ground get smaller and smaller until everything looked like a toy model. Tyler pulled out his book and settled in. It was a biography about astronauts. He'd been obsessed with space ever since his third-grade teacher showed them a documentary about the Mars rover. His dream was to work for NASA one day, maybe even become an astronaut himself. The plane started filling up. Business people in suits rushed past, shoving bags into overhead bins. A family with a crying baby struggled down the aisle. An older couple moved slowly, carefully checking their seat numbers. Tyler smiled at a few people but mostly kept his eyes on his book. Then he heard it. That tone. The one that made his stomach drop even though he couldn't explain why. Excuse me. A woman's voice, sharp and pinched. I think there's been some mistake. Tyler looked up. A middle-aged woman in expensive-looking clothes stood in the aisle, staring at the seat next to him like she'd just discovered a spider there. She was holding her boarding pass in one hand and her designer purse in the other. A flight attendant walked over, young and blonde with a practiced smile. Is there a problem, ma'am? The woman leaned in close and whispered something. Tyler couldn't hear all of it, but he caught fragments. Uncomfortable and by himself, and you understand. Tyler's face grew hot. He knew. Oh, he knew exactly what was happening. His parents had warned him. Not in a scary way, but in that serious voice they used when they wanted him to really listen. Some people might judge you, his dad had said. Not because of who you are, but because of what they think when they look at you. It's not right, but it happens. The flight attendant glanced at Tyler, then back at the woman. Her smile flickered. Let me see what I can do. Tyler wanted to sink into his seat and disappear. He stared hard at his book, the words blurring together. His heart pounded so loud he was sure everyone could hear it. The flight attendant approached him with that same fake smile. Hi there, sweetie. Would you mind moving to a different seat? We have another one available toward the back. Tyler looked up at her. Why, my ticket says 12A. I know, honey, but we're just trying to make sure everyone's comfortable. And there's a really nice seat in the back that I'm comfortable here. Tyler kept his voice steady even though his hands were shaking. The woman huffed loudly, making sure everyone around could hear her displeasure. Another flight attendant appeared, an older guy with gray hair and a name tag that read Robert. He looked annoyed, like Tyler was some kind of problem that needed fixing. The two flight attendants huddled together, whispering. Robert kept glancing back at Tyler with an expression that made him feel small. After what felt like forever, Robert walked over. Son, we need you to move to seat 27C. Let's not make this difficult. The word difficult hit Tyler like a slap. He wasn't being difficult. He was just sitting in his assigned seat reading a book, minding his own business. But apparently that was too much. Tyler felt tears threatening to spill, but he blinked them back hard. No way was he going to cry, not here, not in front of all these people. He closed his book, shoved it into his backpack, and stood up. The walk to the back of the plane was the longest walk of his life. Every step felt heavy, like his shoes were filled with cement. People stared. Some looked curious. Some looked away quickly, like they didn't want to get involved. An elderly black lady a few rows back caught his eye and gave him a sad, knowing look that somehow made everything worse because it meant she understood exactly what was happening. Seat 27C was a middle seat near the bathrooms. The air smelled like cleaning chemicals and recycled air. Tyler squeezed past a man in a business suit who barely glanced up from his laptop. He stuffed his backpack under the seat in front of him and sat down, trying to make himself as small as possible. His phone buzzed. A text from his mom popped up on the screen. "Did you get your window seat, baby? Send me a picture of the view." Tyler stared at the message. His thumb hovered over the keyboard. He could tell her what happened. She'd be on the phone with the airline in seconds, demanding answers, making sure everyone knew what they'd done to her son, but he didn't want to worry her. She was probably at work by now, happy and relieved that he'd made it onto the plane safely. He typed back, "Yeah, all good. We'll call when I land. Love you." It was easier to lie. Up in the front of the plane, the woman who'd complained was now settling into her seat, arranging her things just so. She pulled out a magazine and a bottle of hand sanitizer, looking perfectly content with herself. The flight attendant, Jessica, busied herself with pre-flight duties, but something gnawed at her stomach. A small voice in the back of her mind whispered that what she'd just done wasn't right, but she pushed it away. She was just doing her job, keeping the peace, avoiding conflict. Robert was doing his final check of the cabin when his earpiece crackled to life. "Robert, Captain Mendez needs you at the forward galley." "Right now," Robert frowned. That was unusual. Captains didn't usually call crew members during boarding unless something was seriously wrong. He made his way to the front, weaving between passengers still trying to find their seats. Captain Mendez stood near the cockpit door, her arms crossed, her face unreadable, but her eyes sharp as knives. She was a no-nonsense woman, someone who'd worked her way up in an industry that hadn't always welcomed female pilots. "We have a situation," she said quietly. "Tell me exactly what happened with the young black boy who was moved from row 12. Robert felt his throat tighten. "There was a passenger complaint. She felt uncomfortable, so we relocated the boy to maintain peace and avoid any—" "Maintain peace?" Captain Mendez's voice could have cut glass. "Or maintain prejudice." Before Robert could answer, a voice called from the jet bridge. "Excuse me, may I board now?" The captain's expression shifted slightly. "Yes, General. Please come aboard." Robert turned around and every drop of blood drained from his face. Walking onto the aircraft was a man in full military uniform. The kind of uniform you see in movies. The kind with medals and ribbons and stars on the shoulders. 2 stars to be exact. The man was tall, distinguished, probably in his late 50s. His presence commanded immediate respect. But it was his eyes that made Robert's stomach drop to his feet. Those eyes were filled with barely controlled anger. "I was waiting in the jet bridge for my wife," the general said, his voice calm but dangerous, "and I watched through that door as your crew removed a young man from his seat. That young man is my son." The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. Robert opened his mouth, but no words came out. Jessica, who'd been nearby, froze completely, her face going pale. The general stepped fully onto the plane, and Tyler, sitting all the way in the back by the bathrooms, had no idea that everything was about to change. Robert felt like the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The general stood there in full uniform, medals gleaming under the cabin lights, and suddenly Robert realized just how badly he'd messed up. "Your son?" Robert finally managed to croak out. "Yes, my son." The general's voice was steady, but there was steel underneath every word. "Tyler Thompson, 14 years old, sitting in seat 12A, the seat I paid for, the window seat because this is his first time flying alone and he was excited to see the clouds." Jessica had gone completely white. She stood frozen by the beverage cart, her hand still gripping the handle, unable to move or speak. Captain Mendez stepped forward. She'd been flying for 23 years and had seen a lot of things, but this situation made her blood boil. "General Thompson, I sincerely apologize for what you witnessed. This is completely unacceptable." The general's jaw tightened. "Captain, I've served this country for 33 years. I've been deployed to war zones. I've led troops under enemy fire. I've bled for the flag on this uniform. And I did all of that believing in certain values. Values like equality, like dignity, like judging people by their character, not their skin color." He paused, and the silence in that front section of the plane was deafening. A few first-class passengers had noticed something was happening and were craning their necks to see. "My son has never been in trouble a day in his life," the general continued. "He's a straight-A student. He volunteers at a food bank every Saturday. He wants to be an astronaut. And today, he was removed from his seat because a passenger felt uncomfortable sitting next to a black child." Robert felt sweat forming on his forehead. Sir, I was just trying to avoid conflict. The passenger was upset and I thought, you thought wrong. The general's words cut through Robert's excuse like a knife through butter. You know what I was going to do? I was going to let it go. I was going to board this plane, sit in my seat, and teach my son a lesson about grace under pressure, about taking the high road, about not letting other people's ignorance define you. He took a step closer, and Robert instinctively took a step back, but then I watched my son walk to the back of this plane. I saw his shoulders slump. I saw him pull out his phone and lie to his mother about what happened because he didn't want to worry her. And that's when I realized something. Staying quiet doesn't teach grace. It teaches acceptance of injustice, and I didn't spend 3 decades in uniform to teach my son that. Captain Mendez nodded slowly. She understood exactly what the general meant. She'd faced her own battles as a woman in aviation, dealing with passengers who didn't think she could fly a plane, dealing with colleagues who thought she was a flight attendant instead of their captain. Robert, she said firmly, go get the passenger from seat 12B, bring her here now. Captain, maybe we should... That wasn't a suggestion. Robert's face flushed red, but he turned and headed down the aisle. His legs felt wobbly. Other flight attendants had noticed the commotion and were watching nervously from their stations. When Robert reached row 12, the woman was sitting comfortably with her earbuds in, scrolling through her phone. She had no idea what storm was brewing at the front of the plane. Ma'am, Robert said, his voice cracking slightly. I need you to come with me to the front of the aircraft. The woman pulled out one earbud, annoyed. What? Why? Is something wrong with my seat? Just please come with me. She sighed dramatically, like this was the biggest inconvenience of her life, and followed Robert up the aisle. Some passengers watched them pass. Others were oblivious, lost in their books or phones or pre-flight naps. When she reached the front galley and saw the general in full uniform, her confident expression faltered. She looked from the captain to the general to Robert, confused. Is there a problem? She asked. Captain Mendez gestured toward the general. Ma'am, this is Major General William Thompson. The young man you complained about, the one you felt uncomfortable sitting next to, is his son. The woman's face went through several shades of color. Red, then pale, then red again. I didn't know. I just thought... You thought what? The general's voice was quiet now, which somehow made it even more powerful. That a young black boy reading a book was a threat? That he didn't belong in that seat? What exactly made you uncomfortable about a child? The woman stammered. It's not like that, He was alone and I thought maybe. Maybe what? That he'd stolen the ticket? That he was trouble? That he didn't have parents who could afford that seat? The general didn't raise his voice, but each question landed like a punch. The woman looked down at her expensive shoes. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Yes, you did, the general agreed. But you know what? Your mistake I can almost understand. People have prejudices. They make assumptions. It's wrong, but it's human. What I can't accept is that trained professionals, people responsible for the safety and comfort of all passengers, validated your prejudice instead of standing up for a child. He turned to look at Robert and Jessica. Both of them looked like they wanted to disappear into the airplane floor. You had a choice, the general said to them. You could have told this passenger that the boy was in his assigned seat and had every right to be there. You could have explained that airline policy doesn't allow discrimination. You could have done the right thing. Instead, you chose the easy thing. Jessica finally found her voice. Sir, I'm so sorry. I was just trying to keep everyone happy. I didn't think. That's the problem. You didn't think. You didn't think about what message you were sending to my son. You didn't think about all the other kids who might face the same situation without someone to speak up for them. You just didn't think. Captain Mendez had heard enough. She was angry too, but she also knew they needed to resolve this situation and get the flight moving. They were already delayed. Here's what's going to happen, she announced, her voice leaving no room for argument. Tyler Thompson will be returned to his original seat, 12A. Ma'am? She looked at the woman. You'll be relocated to seat 27C in the back. Robert and Jessica, both of you will be meeting with our HR department and attending mandatory retraining when we land in Atlanta. The woman started to protest. But you paid for a seat on this aircraft. You're getting a seat on this aircraft. Just not that one. Captain Mendez was done being diplomatic. The general held up his hand. Captain, I appreciate what you're doing, but I don't need special treatment. I don't want first class. I just want my son to have what he paid for, what he deserves, the seat he was assigned. And he'll get it, the captain assured him. You and your wife are welcome to sit wherever you'd like. We'll sit in economy, near our son. That's all I want. Robert was given his orders. He had to go to the back of the plane and bring Tyler forward. As he walked down that aisle again, he felt different than he had 15 minutes ago. Then he'd felt righteous, like he was solving a problem. Now, he felt ashamed. Deeply, thoroughly ashamed. In the back, Tyler was still sitting in 27C, staring at nothing. His book lay closed on his lap. He'd tried to read but couldn't focus. The words just swam around on the page. He kept replaying what happened, wondering if he should have argued more, stood his ground, demanded to speak to a supervisor. But he was 14, and they were adults, and sometimes adults don't listen to kids, especially kids who look like him. Tyler. Robert's voice was soft now, almost gentle. Tyler looked up, his eyes guarded. What now? I need you to come with me. We're moving you back to your original seat. Tyler's heart started racing. What? Why? Am I getting kicked off? No. No. Nothing like that. Just, please, come with me. Tyler grabbed his backpack and stood up slowly. The businessman in the aisle seat still didn't look up. Tyler squeezed past him and followed Robert toward the front of the plane. As they walked, Tyler noticed people watching him differently now. Some were smiling, some were whispering to each other. The elderly black woman he'd seen earlier nodded at him with a look that said, everything would be okay. Tyler's confusion grew with every step. What was happening? Had they changed their minds? Were they going to apologize? He almost didn't dare to hope. Then he reached row 12 and saw something that made his heart stop. His father, standing there in full dress uniform, looking like a superhero who'd just stepped out of a movie. Dad? Tyler's voice cracked. What are you doing here? And that's when everything Tyler thought he knew about this day completely changed. Tyler stood frozen in the aisle, his backpack hanging from one shoulder, staring at his father like he was seeing a ghost. His brain couldn't process what his eyes were seeing. His dad wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to arrive in Atlanta until next week. That's what they'd told him. That's why Tyler was flying alone in the first place. Dad? Tyler said again, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't understand. General Thompson's stern military face melted instantly. He stepped forward and pulled his son into a tight hug, the kind of hug that says everything without words. Tyler felt his father's strong arms around him, and suddenly, all the emotions he'd been holding back came rushing to the surface. His eyes stung with tears, but he blinked them away. What are you doing here? Tyler asked into his father's uniform. You said you couldn't make it until next week. His father pulled back and looked him in the eye. Your mother and I decided to surprise you. We changed our plans. We were going to wait at the gate in Atlanta and surprise you there. He paused, his jaw tightening. But then I saw what happened. I saw everything from the jet bridge, and I couldn't just wait. Tyler's stomach dropped. You saw? Every bit of it. I watched them move you. I watched you walk to the back of the plane, and I watched you text your mother and lie to her so she wouldn't worry. His father's voice cracked slightly. That's when I knew I had to say something. Tyler looked around. The woman who'd complained was standing near the cockpit looking at the floor. Robert and Jessica were both there too, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Captain Mendez stood with her arms crossed, looking like someone you definitely didn't want to mess with. I'm sorry, Dad, Tyler said quietly. I didn't want to cause any trouble. Stop. His father put both hands on Tyler's shoulders and looked directly into his eyes. You listen to me, son. You did nothing wrong. Nothing. You sat in your assigned seat. You were reading a book. You were being respectful and quiet. There is absolutely nothing you need to apologize for. But they said, I don't care what they said. They were wrong. And I'm going to make sure you understand that what happened to you was not okay. It will never be okay. Captain Mendez stepped forward. Tyler, I want to apologize to you personally. What happened was completely unacceptable. You are a passenger on this flight. You have every right to sit in your assigned seat, and we failed you. I'm sorry. Tyler nodded, not quite sure what to say. He'd never had an adult apologize to him like that before. It felt weird and good at the same time. Thank you, ma'am, he managed to say. His father guided him back toward row 12. Come on, let's get you back to your window seat. As Tyler slid into 12A, the seat he'd been so excited about hours earlier, he noticed the middle seat was empty now. His father sat down in 12B, the aisle seat right next to him. Where's the lady? Tyler asked, though he thought he already knew the answer. She's been moved to the back, his father said simply. To the seat they tried to put you in. Tyler thought about that for a moment. Part of him felt satisfied, like justice had been served. But another part of him felt something else. Something more complicated. Do you think she's a bad person? His father considered the question carefully. He never gave Tyler easy answers. He always made him think, I think she's a person who made a bad choice. She let her fears and prejudices control her actions. That doesn't make her evil. But it does mean she needs to learn and grow. We all have biases, son. The question is whether we let them control us or whether we challenge them. Before Tyler could respond, he heard a familiar voice. Baby! He looked up and saw his mother rushing down the aisle, her face a mix of concern and relief. She was wearing her favorite blue dress, the one she wore on special occasions. She'd clearly dressed up for the surprise. Mom. Tyler stood up and she wrapped him in a hug that somehow felt even tighter than his father's. Are you okay? Your father told me what happened. She pulled back and examined his face like she was checking for injuries. Did anyone hurt you? Are you okay? I'm fine, Mom. Really, I'm okay now. She sat down in the middle seat and suddenly Tyler was sandwiched between both his parents. His mother took his hand and held it tight. Tyler, I need you to hear this. You are worthy of sitting wherever you want to sit. You belong anywhere you choose to be. Don't ever let anyone make you feel less than what you are. Tyler nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. I know, Mom. Do you? Because it's one thing to know something up here. She tapped his forehead gently, and another thing to know it in here. She placed her hand over his heart. The plane started to fill up with the last few passengers. People glanced at the uniformed general sitting in economy and did double takes. Some whispered to each other. A little kid a few rows back kept staring until his mother gently turned his head forward. Robert appeared one more time, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. General, Mrs. Thompson, Tyler, is there anything I can get you before we take off? The general looked at him for a long moment. Robert, let me ask you something. Do you have kids? Robert blinked, surprised by the question. Yes, sir. 2 daughters, 8 and 11. And if someone treated one of your daughters the way you treated my son today, how would you feel? Robert's face crumpled. I'd be furious, sir. I'd be heartbroken. Then I hope you remember this moment. I hope you remember how it feels to realize you did something that would break your own heart. 'Cause that's how you grow. That's how you become better. Robert nodded, his eyes red. I will, sir. I promise you I will. After he walked away, Tyler's mother squeezed his hand. I'm proud of how you handled yourself, baby. You kept your composure. You didn't yell or cry or make a scene. That takes real strength. I wanted to, Tyler admitted. I wanted to yell at them. Tell them how unfair it was. And you would have been right to, his father said. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is maintain your dignity. People remember that. They remember how you carry yourself. The flight attendants began their safety demonstration. Tyler watched them point out the emergency exits, demonstrate the oxygen masks, show how the seat cushions could be used as flotation devices. It all seemed so normal, like nothing had happened, but everything had changed. As the plane started backing away from the gate, Tyler looked out his window. The window he'd wanted so badly. The ground crew was waving their orange batons. Luggage carts zipped around. Other planes taxied toward runways. Dad? Tyler said quietly, Yeah, son. Thank you for speaking up. I know you could have just stayed quiet. His father put his arm around Tyler's shoulders. Let me tell you something. When I was about your age, something similar happened to me. I was at a restaurant with my father, your grandfather, and the hostess tried to seat us in the back. even though there were plenty of tables up front. You know what your grandfather did? What? He politely but firmly insisted on a table near the window. He didn't make a scene. He didn't yell. He just stood his ground. And when we finally sat down, he told me something I've never forgotten. He said, "Son, being quiet about injustice doesn't make you peaceful. It makes you complicit." Tyler thought about that word, complicit. They'd learned it in history class when studying the civil rights movement. It meant being part of the problem by not standing up against it. So you spoke up for me the way Grandpa spoke up for you? Exactly. And one day you'll speak up for someone else. Maybe your own kid. Maybe a stranger. But you'll remember this day and you'll know why it matters. The plane turned onto the runway. The engines roared to life, building power. Tyler felt the acceleration push him back into his seat. His mother held his hand on one side. His father's arm stayed around his shoulders on the other. The nose lifted. The wheels left the ground. And through his window, Tyler watched Chicago get smaller and smaller until the buildings looked like toys and the cars looked like ants. He was flying. Really flying. And despite everything that had happened, despite the hurt and the embarrassment and the anger, he felt something else too. He felt proud. Proud that his father had stood up for him. Proud that he'd kept his composure. Proud that he was learning what it really meant to have dignity. Behind them, several rows back near the bathroom, the woman sat in seat 27C. She stared at her hands, thinking about what the general had said. For the first time in a long time, she was forced to look at herself honestly, and she didn't like what she saw. Change is uncomfortable. Growth hurts. But sometimes 30,000 feet in the air, lessons are learned that could never be taught on the ground. The flight from Chicago to Atlanta was 2.5 hours long. But for Tyler, it felt like it passed in minutes. He spent most of the time talking with his parents, really talking, in a way they hadn't done in months. There was something about being 30,000 feet in the air that made conversations feel more honest, more real. His father told him stories Tyler had never heard before. Like the time he was passed over for a promotion in the military because a superior officer didn't think he had the right leadership presence. Code words. His dad explained that sometimes means something else entirely. "What did you do?" Tyler asked, genuinely curious. "I worked twice as hard. I made sure my record was spotless. I became so good at my job that they couldn't ignore me anymore. And eventually I got promoted 2 ranks higher than that officer who doubted me." His father smiled, but there was sadness in it too. "But I shouldn't have had to be twice as good to be seen as equal. That's the part that never sits right with me." His mother had her own stories. She told Tyler about being the only black woman in her medical school class, about how patients sometimes assumed she was a nurse instead of a doctor, about how she'd learned to correct people with a smile even when she felt like screaming. "The world isn't always fair, baby," she said softly. "But that doesn't mean we stop fighting for fairness. We just learn to fight smarter." Tyler looked out the window at the clouds below. They looked like cotton balls or maybe mountains made of snow. He'd imagined this view 1,000 times, but seeing it in real life was different. Everything seemed smaller from up here. Even big problems looked tiny when you rose above them. "Can I ask you something?" Tyler said, turning back to his parents. "Anything," his mother replied. "Do you think that lady back there is thinking about what happened? Like, do you think she feels bad?" His father glanced back toward the rear of the plane, then back at Tyler. "I don't know, son. I hope so. Real change starts with recognizing you were wrong. But some people never get there. They spend their whole lives making excuses for their behavior instead of examining it. What if she does feel bad? What happens then?" "Then she becomes a better person," his mother said. "And maybe next time she won't make the same mistake. That's all we can hope for. We can't force people to change, but we can make them uncomfortable enough to question themselves." A flight attendant passed by. A different one this time. An older black woman who hadn't been involved in the earlier incident. She smiled warmly at Tyler's family and asked if they needed anything. His mother requested ginger ale for Tyler and coffee for herself. As the attendant walked away, Tyler noticed how she moved through the cabin with such grace, handling demanding passengers with patience he wasn't sure he could ever have. He wondered if she'd ever faced situations like his. Probably. Almost definitely. About an hour into the flight, something unexpected happened. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, came walking down the aisle with her mother. She stopped right next to Tyler's row and tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, look. A general!" She pointed at Tyler's father with wide, excited eyes. The mother looked embarrassed. "Sweetie, it's not polite to point." But Tyler's father smiled, his whole face transforming. "It's okay. What's your name, young lady?" "Zoe," the girl said shyly, suddenly aware that this important-looking man was talking directly to her. "Well, Zoe, it's very nice to meet you. Are you interested in the military?" She nodded enthusiastically. "My uncle is in the army. He's deployed right now. We miss him a lot. I bet you do, and I bet he misses you too. You tell him thank you for his service when you see him, okay?" "Okay," Zoe beamed. Then she noticed the medals on his uniform. "Did you get those for being brave?" Tyler's father glanced at his son, then back at the little girl. "I got these for doing my job and for standing up for what's right. Sometimes being brave means fighting, but sometimes it means speaking up when you see something wrong, even when it's easier to stay quiet." The little girl nodded solemnly, like she understood something important had just been said. Her mother smiled gratefully and guided her back to their seats. After they left, Tyler turned to his father. "You're really good with kids," his dad laughed. "I should be. I've got a pretty great kid of my own." Tyler felt his cheeks warm with pride. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Folks, we're about 40 minutes from Atlanta. We'll be starting our descent soon. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin." Tyler realized the flight was almost over. Soon they'd land, walk off this plane, and this whole experience would become a memory. But what kind of memory would it be? The kind that made him angry and bitter? Or the kind that taught him something important? His mother seemed to read his thoughts. "Tyler, can I tell you what I think is the most important thing about today?" "What?" "It's not that something bad happened to you. Bad things happen to everyone at some point. What matters is that you had people who stood up for you, and that you learned you have a voice worth using. Some kids go through experiences like this and nobody speaks up. They learn that the world is unfair and there's nothing they can do about it." She squeezed his hand. "But you learned something different. You learned that speaking up matters, that standing your ground matters, that demanding the respect you deserve matters, and someday you'll use that lesson to help someone else." Tyler thought about that. He imagined himself older, maybe in college or at a job, seeing someone else being treated unfairly. Would he speak up? After today, he thought maybe he would. The plane began its descent. Tyler's ears popped. He looked out the window and saw Atlanta appearing below them. The buildings growing larger, the highways filled with tiny cars all heading somewhere important. "Dad?" Tyler said. "Yeah? I'm glad you spoke up. Even though part of me wishes the whole thing never happened, I'm glad you didn't just let it go." His father's eyes got a little shiny. "Me too, son. Me too." As the plane touched down with a gentle bump, Tyler felt something shift inside him. He was still the same kid who'd boarded in Chicago. Still 14, still dreaming of being an astronaut. But he was also different somehow. He'd faced something difficult and come out the other side with his dignity intact. The plane taxied to the gate. People started standing up, grabbing their bags from the overhead bins, everyone eager to get off and get on with their lives. Tyler stayed seated with his parents in no rush. They'd wait for the crowd to thin out. Robert appeared one more time. He looked like he'd been crying at some point during the flight. His eyes were red, his face blotchy. "General Thompson, Mrs. Thompson, Tyler," he said quietly. "I just wanted to say one more time how deeply sorry I am. I've been flying for 15 years, and I've never been more ashamed of myself than I am today. I promise you I'm going to do better. I'm going to be better." Tyler's father stood up and extended his hand. Robert looked surprised but shook it. "I believe you," the general said, "and I hope you mean it. Because kids like my son are counting on adults like you to do the right thing." "I will, sir. I promise." As passengers filed past, several people stopped to speak with Tyler's family. The elderly black woman from row 18 paused and said, "Thank you for standing up, General. We all needed to see that today." A young white man, maybe in his 20s, shook the general's hand. "Sir, I was in the Marines. What you did today reminded me why I served. Thank you." Even a businessman who'd been working on his laptop the whole flight stopped and said to Tyler, "Kid, you handled yourself with real class back there. Don't let the world make you hard." Tyler nodded at each person, feeling both embarrassed and proud at the same time. Finally, the cabin was mostly empty. Tyler and his parents gathered their things and walked toward the exit. Captain Mendez was standing by the cockpit door, something pilots rarely did. "Tyler," she said, "I hope your next flight is better than this one." "Thank you, Captain," Tyler replied. As they stepped off the plane onto the jet bridge, Tyler took one last look back at the aircraft. Seat 12A, his seat, the window seat he'd fought for without even knowing he was fighting, and he smiled. Because sometimes, the view is worth the struggle. 3 weeks after the flight, Tyler was sitting at his grandmother's kitchen table doing homework when the mailman knocked on the door. His grandmother, a spry woman in her 70s who insisted everyone call her Nana, shuffled to the door and returned with a thick envelope. "It's for you, baby," she said, handing it to Tyler. "Looks official." Tyler looked at the return address. It was from the airline. His stomach did a little flip. He carefully opened the envelope and pulled out a letter on fancy letterhead. The letter was from the CEO of the airline. Tyler read it out loud to his grandmother, his voice getting quieter as he went. It was a formal apology. Not just a generic "we're sorry for any inconvenience" letter, but a real, detailed apology that acknowledged exactly what happened and why it was wrong. They included a full refund for his ticket and vouchers for future flights. But that wasn't all. The letter also explained that the airline was implementing new training programs for all staff about implicit bias and discrimination. They were creating a youth advisory board to help them better understand and serve young travelers from all backgrounds. And they wanted Tyler to be one of the first members. "Well, look at that," Nana said, reading over his shoulder. "They're actually trying to do better. Do you think they mean it?" Tyler asked. "Or is this just because Dad made a big deal about it?" Nana sat down across from him and took his hands in hers. Her hands were soft and wrinkled, hands that had seen decades of life. "Baby, does it matter? Maybe they're doing it because your daddy spoke up. Maybe they're doing it because they're scared of bad publicity. But if it means the next kid doesn't have to go through what you did, does the reason really matter?" Tyler thought about that. His grandmother had a way of cutting through all the complicated stuff and getting to what was real. "I guess not. That's right. Change is change, no matter what motivates it. And if you can be part of making sure other kids don't feel what you felt, well, that's a gift." Tyler decided to join the advisory board. Over the next few months, he participated in video calls with airline executives, sharing his perspective on how young travelers were treated. He wasn't the only kid on the board. There was a girl in a wheelchair who talked about accessibility issues. A kid who didn't speak English as his first language talked about communication barriers. A teenager with anxiety explained how overwhelming airports could be. Together, they were making a real difference. And Tyler realized something important. The bad thing that happened to him was becoming something good for others. But the real change was happening inside Tyler himself. He started a blog called Window Seat Stories. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple site where kids could share their experiences with discrimination and how they dealt with it. His first post was about his flight. He didn't expect anyone to read it. But within a week, his story had been shared thousands of times. News websites picked it up. His inbox flooded with messages from other kids who'd gone through similar things. A boy from Texas wrote about being followed around a store because of how he looked. A girl from New York talked about teachers who assumed she couldn't speak English, even though she was born in America. A kid from California shared a story about being told he couldn't play certain sports because of his size. Tyler read every single message, and he replied to as many as he could. He realized that his story wasn't special because it was unique. It was special because it was common. Too common. And that needed to change. 6 months after the flight, Tyler's school invited him to speak at an assembly. He was terrified. Speaking in front of the whole school felt scarier than facing those flight attendants, but his parents encouraged him, and his grandmother told him he had something important to say. So he stood on that stage, his hand shaking, and told his story. He talked about feeling small and powerless. He talked about wanting to disappear into his seat. He talked about the shame of walking to the back of the plane. But then he talked about his father standing up for him, about learning that dignity matters, about discovering that speaking up can change things, about turning pain into purpose. "I'm not telling you this story to make you feel sorry for me," Tyler told his classmates. "I'm telling you because someday you're going to see something unfair happen. Maybe to you, maybe to someone else, and you're going to have a choice. You can stay quiet and let it slide, or you can speak up. And I'm here to tell you that speaking up matters. It's scary and it's hard, and sometimes people won't like it, but it matters. The auditorium was completely silent when he finished. Then someone started clapping. Then another person. Then everyone. Tyler felt his face get hot, but this time it wasn't from shame. It was from pride. After the assembly, kids came up to him all day. Some shared their own stories. Some just said thank you. A quiet kid named David, who Tyler barely knew, told him that he'd been bullied for months and never told anyone. But after hearing you talk, David said, I think I'm going to tell a teacher, because if you can stand up for yourself, maybe I can too. That's when Tyler understood the real lesson from that day on the plane. It wasn't just about him getting his seat back. It was about learning that every voice matters, that standing up for yourself gives other people permission to stand up for themselves too. A year after the flight, on Tyler's 15th birthday, something arrived in the mail that made him cry. It was an anonymous card with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note. Dear Tyler, you don't know me, but I was on your flight from Chicago to Atlanta last year. I was the woman in seat 12B. I've thought about that day every single day since. I was wrong. I was ignorant. I let fear and prejudice control my actions, and I hurt a child because of it. I can't take back what I did, but I can tell you that you changed me. I've been in therapy working on my biases. I volunteer at a community center in a neighborhood I used to avoid. I'm learning slowly to be better. I'm enclosing a donation to the scholarship fund I read about on your blog. I know it doesn't fix what I did, but I hope it helps someone. Thank you for your grace. Thank you for teaching me what I should have learned long ago. The donation was for $5,000, made out to the scholarship fund Tyler had started for kids interested in aviation and space exploration. Tyler showed the card to his parents. His mother cried. His father put his arm around both of them and said, This is what change looks like, son. It's messy and slow and imperfect, but it's real. Tyler kept that card in his desk drawer right next to the letter from the airline. Reminders that people could grow, that speaking up could lead to real change, that his voice mattered. 2 years later, Tyler applied to a special science and technology high school. In his application essay, he wrote about that flight. Not about the discrimination, but about what came after. About learning that challenges can become opportunities. About discovering that your worst days can teach you your most important lessons. About understanding that dignity isn't something someone gives you. It's something you claim for yourself. He was accepted with a full scholarship. On his first day at the new school, Tyler noticed a kid sitting alone in the cafeteria. A kid who looked uncomfortable, out of place, like he didn't quite belong. Tyler recognized that feeling. He'd felt it himself, so he walked over and sat down. Hey, I'm Tyler. Mind if I join you? The kid looked up, surprised and grateful. Really? Yeah, sure. I'm Kevin. As they talked, Tyler realized this was it. This was how change really happened. Not in grand gestures or viral stories, but in small moments of kindness. In choosing to sit with someone who's alone. In speaking up when others stay silent. In remembering what it felt like to need someone to stand up for you. And then being that person for someone else. Years from now, when Tyler finally achieved his dream of working in aerospace engineering, he would still remember that flight. Not as the day he was discriminated against, but as the day he learned what really mattered. He learned that a window seat is just a seat, but dignity is everything. He learned that staying silent protects no one, but speaking up can change the world. He learned that the view from the top is better when you bring others up with you. And most importantly, he learned that sometimes the worst moments in your life prepare you for the best parts of who you'll become. Tyler never forgot where he came from or what he'd been through, but he also never let it define him. Instead, he let it refine him. He let it shape him into someone who stood up not just for himself, but for everyone who needed a voice. Because that's what his father taught him 30,000 feet in the air. That's what his mother reinforced with every conversation. That's what his grandmother reminded him of with her wisdom. You don't just take your seat, you claim your space. You demand your dignity, and then you help others do the same. And that makes all the difference.